Welcome, everyone. This is our last as we explore Pope Leo's encyclical Magnifica Humanitas. We're looking at chapter 5 today, as well as the conclusion. But before we begin, Sister Elizabeth is going to lead us in prayer.
And I'm can you see my screen? No, you can't, because I just knocked it out. Okay, so when we begin, Bill, would you do the land acknowledgement for us?
You make that bigger? If we have to.
Either that, you're gonna have to go right up against it.
Yeah, I'll just go down to get the parts and come back up again. I'll make it a little tiny bit larger. So Bill will do the land acknowledgement, the prayer for the courage to co-create. Charlotte, would you do that for us? Roshi,
Yes.
you would do the reading from the Gospel of John. Carmel, if you would do the reading from Magnifica Humanitas. And the final reflection to weavers everywhere. Dorothy Wilcott, can you do that? So the theme I've used is the actual ending of Pope Leo's encyclical. Of those of you who've read it, he says at the very end of that, let us become weavers of hope in our world. So that will be the theme of the beginning of our prayer. So Bill.
We respectfully acknowledge the land where Queen's College sits as the ancestral homelands of Beothuk, whose culture have been lost forever and can never be recovered. We also acknowledge the island of Newfoundland as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and Mi'kmaq. And we acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Netassisin, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Innu of Nunatsiavut. We recognize all First Peoples who were here countless generations before us, those who live with us now and the 7 generations to come. We acknowledge our interconnection to the land, to each other, and to the Creator. Today, we are connected online via the different system, a vast array of servers, cables, and computer devices maintained by human actors. In Canada, much of this infrastructure sits on stolen land acquired under the extra logic of white settler expansion. As a community of learning, Queen's College recognizes the history and uplifts the sovereignty of Indigenous people and territory, especially of the Mi'kmaq, Inuit, and Innu people. We commit beyond symbolic rhetoric to dismantling all ongoing settler colonial practices, their material implications on our digital worlds, and the impacts of the digital technologies like AI on the land, the waters, the air, and our other than human relations.
Creator of all that has been and all that is yet to be, you have entrusted this beautiful broken world to human hands. When we are tempted toward despair, give us imagination. When we are tempted towards certainty, give us curiosity. When we are tempted to wait for someone else to save us, give us courage. Teach us to become worthy ancestors. Help us build communities that nurture life, protect what is fragile, and create futures that our children will bless. And remind us again and again that hope is not prediction, it is participation. Amen.
Sam and check down there, and she said that, well, they take care of it. Yeah.
Oh, Sheen.
No, I didn't.
We can do
Yeah.
the same. Right. So you tell her that.
When it was evening, is it to read the reading, Elizabeth?
Yes, yeah.
When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. Let us become weavers of hope." Am I to continue?
Yes, sure, Roisin, yes.
Let us become weavers of hope in our world, sharing who we are and what we have, so that the presence of Jesus may grow among us and his kingdom take shape. In the humble fidelity of daily life, even the era of AI can become a time in which the Holy Spirit brings about the civilization of love in our lives.
Give it away, I don't want.
I'll get the door. Okay.
No, I said.
Sandy Butler, can you do the reading, next reading?
Did she eat anything for her lunch?
Oh, yeah. Yes, Elizabeth, no problem.
Yeah.
To weavers everywhere, God sits weeping, the beautiful creation tapestry she wove with such joy is mutilated. She wove with such joy is mutilated, torn into shreds, reduced to rags, its beauty fragmented by force. God sits weeping. But look, she is gathering up the shreds to weave something new. She gathers the rags of hard work, attempts at advocacy, initiatives for peace, protests against injustice, all the seemingly little and weak words and deeds offered sacrificially in hope, in faith, in love. And look, she is weaving them all with golden threads of jubilation into a new tapestry, a creation richer, more beautiful than the old one was. And she invites us not only to keep offering her the shreds and rags of our suffering and our work, but even more, to take our place beside her at the Jubilee loom and weave with her the tapestry of the new creation.
Robert, over to you.
So we are looking at chapter 5. I have some slides on chapter 5. I don't have any slides on the conclusion because I only read the conclusion this morning. And I did that intentionally because I wanted it fresh in my mind when we talked today. I want to go through these slides very quickly because I want to leave more time for conversation because this is our last session. And the subtitle of our sessions has been around conversations. So I want to provide some time to do just that, but also to talk about what next, or even so what. So we've read this encyclical now, so what do we do? So the chapter 5 is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Really two main points and then some points under there, and we'll go through these quick. A couple of people in the room have said this was their favorite chapter. So there's that. So he begins this chapter talking again about this image of Babel versus Nehemiah, talking about the civilization of love. I've had issues with this image the whole time between Babel and Nehemiah, and he mentioned it at one point in one of the other chapters where he talks about it. It's being more cultivated than built. And I like the image that Sister Elizabeth just used in that poem about weaving. I think that's a good image too. And the dualism between Babel and Nehemiah, I think, is a bit simplistic. Of course, there's echoes of Augustine's City of God in here. But anytime you get caught up in a dualism, it can give a very simplistic kind of response to a very complicated issue. Because it's not that the civilization of love is somehow separate from the culture of power, but that it blossoms from within it, right? So it's not that everything over here in the civilization of love is good and everything over here in the culture of power is bad, but that they are more intertwined than we probably are willing to admit. But he does have this wonderful line in this section, and I don't know if I didn't notice it in other chapters, but in this chapter he had some wonderful turns of phrase that really just were very poetic in a way. So I maybe it was the whole way through and I just wasn't paying close enough attention. But he talks about us being unwitting builders and clumsy architects. That is great. I love that line. And it really points to one of the issues that someone brought up about, him preaching to the choir kind of in this. But I think this has implications beyond, the churchiness of this, that there are people who are unwitting builders and clumsy architects in the building of the civilization of love. And that idea of the civilization of love comes from Paul VI, who was writing during the polarization of the Cold War. A lot of similarities between the time that we're living in right now, which seems to be very polarized, again, along ideological lines. Again, another great line, translating charity into structures of justice. And this has been a theme all throughout this encyclical, pushing us to shift away from a purely charitable approach to the social issues that are facing us towards creating, cultivating, weaving structures of justice. He says, it is not enough for artificial intelligence to make us more efficient or connected. It must also serve to build a universal family with shared rights and duties, where digital proximity becomes a real opportunity for encounter and mutual care. I love that line, a universal family, which to me really picks up on that phrase or idea of the kingdom of God, right? That the kingdom of God or the reign of God is not a hierarchical top-down rule. It is really a relationship that goes out, and it connects us through familial connections, not through power structures. And I guess we would include that not just between human beings, but also through all of creation, land, water, air, other than human relations as well. Let's get going. So the culture of power. He says that the culture of power is taking hold, as if this is some new thing. So my question is, is this anything new? Is that we never had a culture of power, and now all of a sudden this culture of power is emerging? I think this culture of power is as old as civilization itself. It's something that human beings and human communities have struggled with from the very beginning. So I don't think this is anything new. Unless he turned his gaze away from the church, the church is also in danger of this culture of power. I'm sure we could all share stories and experiences where the church has operated more in line with the culture of power than the civilization of love. But really what he's talking about here in with the culture of power is really, again, the normalization of war, which again, you could say has always been, but it just seems to be a bit more prominent now. And look no further than the evening news, your social media feed, to see that it seems the normalization of war seems to be very prominent again. And he calls this a paradigm shift. And I think throughout this chapter, what he's talking about is the undoing of a lot of the structures, institutions, and relationships that emerged in the post-Second World War era that became kind of de facto entities in our lives, in our common life together, that are now slowly being dismantled, torn down, set ablaze. So there's a caution. He says public opinion is gradually being shaped and conditioned by polarizing media narratives, which are often amplified by algorithms that prioritize conflict and confrontation. I think there's been some research done to show just how fast negative messages spread on social media. They spread like 2 to 3 times faster than positive messages. We are certainly in the age of perpetual ideological conflict. Even if there is no war, there certainly is ideological conflict, if not war, happening all the time. To which Leo says, just war theory is now outdated. And for those of you that might need a refresher in just war theory, we could spend another 4 to 6 months, years, talking about just war theory, but I just put up the main points. And there is no one just war theory. These different points from different thinkers down through the years. So for a war to be just, there needs to be just cause, not just cause, just cause. Although some people go to war just cause. That's because they can. There needs to be a legitimate authority. And I think this is one of the main reasons why he points out that just war theory now no longer works. Because what is legitimate authority now? There needs to be a right intention. Last resort. So many of these are so open-ended that someone who's operating in good faith probably would take this to heart. Someone who's acting in bad faith might take this as a very open-ended defense of any kind of war or conflict.
When you say that just war theory is no longer status quo,
He said that. I'm quoting him. I would agree with him. I don't think it ever worked, but at least somebody at the top of the Catholic Church finally noticed.
let me rephrase this. I know the gentleman was, his name again, Leo, I believe.
Yes.
You said that you would affirm that would be your understanding, was
That
just war theory would no longer be.
I don't think it ever did. I would never have held to just war theory. I don't think there's any such thing.
Well, there's theory, but it's not
Yeah,
warfare.
but there's no, in my mind, there's no such thing as a just war. So it's good to see someone at the head of the church say, this view doesn't apply anymore.
I don't remember who it was, but there was someone in the Catholic Church, I can't remember if it was a pope, who basically said that just war theory was outdated after World War II because of the atomic bomb.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, like, for Leo to say it now, there was already someone who said it like half a century ago.
If I'm not mistaken, I know that the Berrigans, Jesuit priests who were involved in an awful lot of anti-war protests, that was definitely, I mean, they said it many times, whether or not they were the first to say it.
Yeah, and I think it's significant that he's using that phraseology in the context of conversations around artificial intelligence.
Right.
Right before it was nuclear weapons,
Yeah.
which I on record in these sessions saying artificial intelligence could be just as dangerous as
Please.
nuclear weapons if rolled out in the wrong kind of way. So I think the significance is saying it in this context, which a lot of people maybe are not making the connection between the possible danger of AI when it comes to war. I mean, he's taking this very serious because he's got a whole chapter on artificial intelligence and war and violence, right? Some people would say he could have ended the encyclical with chapter 4, and but I think he thinks it's significant enough to. He's very direct in this chapter over and over again.
With the war going on in Ukraine, if drones doing it all.
And I don't want to get bogged down in just war theory. Take me out for a beer and we'll
Sit down and talk.
Yeah.
As you said, it's just war.
So I'm going to skip ahead to the force without limits. He points to the growth of the military industrial complex, which is a reference back to Eisenhower's famous speech as he was leaving office, warning the American electorate and their political and military institutions about the danger of a military industrial complex that grows out of control. So now it's like we're on the frontier of another big step in that military industrial complex. In fact, he says there's a drive towards rearmament in the world right now. You just look at NATO, look at our own country.
Yeah.
Massive increases in military spending in the next, not even decade now, in the next 2 to 3 years. All of this is driven by the lust for power, profits, and willingness to go to war, coupled with AI tech, is a dangerous combination. Very dangerous combination. Pope Leo says it is much easier to start a war than to stop it. And yet, discussion on conflict prevention remains tragically marginal. I don't know, where could we look in current geopolitical events to see where it's quite easy to start a war, but kind of hard to get out of a war? And it depends on the time of day.
Forgive me, but I'm sensing satire.
No, that's all.
I think I saw something either this morning or last night that said that this war has been declared over sober 38 times.
Yeah.
Sometimes twice in a day.
Yes.
Exactly.
Go for Guinness records.
The objective in all of this seems to be no longer victory, but perpetual conflict as a way to power and profit. I'd take that one step further. It seems that the objective is no longer victory, but chaos.
And I take one further, which is the whole objective is that rich people get richer.
Exactly.
Period.
When it comes to weapons and AI, he says the use of AI in warfare must have ethical restraints to ensure human dignity, sanctity of life, and to avoid a new arms race. I think we already have a new arms race.
Yeah, you can't avoid it.
It's already here. And these kinds of ethical restraints
Yeah.
he says, cannot be left to artificial moral agents. So this is AI making decisions about the use of AI in military conflict. That raises all kinds of ethical issues, but this is typical of our approach to technology, especially digital technology. We think a more powerful or fine-tuned technology can be the solution to the problems created by technology. So in a way, technology itself is an arms race because it's trying to
Vicious circle.
fix the problems that it creates over and over again. So Pope Leo gives 3 ethical criteria for the use of weapons and AI. Just say them very quickly. The idea of personal responsibility, that we will be able to point to who did this, who pushed the button, who clicked enter on that weapons launch. There needs to be a time frame for judgment, preferably a longer one, that we do not act quickly when it comes to the use of AI and weapons. And obviously the identification and protection of civilians, which leads to non-negotiable requirements. We need to be able to retrace decision-making processes, again, so we can see what was the chain of command, who made the decisions and when. Something that he repeats over and over again in various sections within this chapter is the need for transparency in any kind of process when it comes to artificial intelligence technology. Not opaque, behind closed doors, secretive decision-making, and nothing that's automated. And that there needs to be a shared framework. And as we read on, we can see that what he means by this is a shared framework amongst different elements of society, science, politicians, religious leaders, people involved in ethics, banks. But I think he also means like on a global scale as well, that there needs to be cooperation across beyond kind of national interests. And so he says there is a crisis of multilateralism right now. In fact, a failure of multilateralism, which I think picks up on his thing right at the beginning of the encyclical around subsidiarity, that decisions be made as close to the people that it impacts as possible. So as multilateralism breaks down, I think that subsidiarity becomes less and less likely, because someone in Washington is making decisions about life in Ukraine or Gaza or somewhere else, or Cuba. And all of this, I think, goes along with a kind of fracture, a decline in democracy, that we increasingly feel that our democratic institutions, political institutions, don't really represent the needs, the desires of the average person, but are more reflective of corporations and billionaires. In fact, we are regressing instead of progressing on many of these things. It's a return or a popularization, I guess, of might makes right, because I think might makes right has always dominated our politics. But it's just now, it's more out there. It's wielded with less shame, right? It's more overt now. And you listen to certain political leaders and that's what they're saying, like, might makes right. We're going to wipe out an entire civilization.
There's a
Right.
sense of pride.
Yeah, there's a sense of pride in it.
And it's okay.
That's totally fine. And I think because of this failure of multilateralism, there has been a rise in nationalism, ideology, and culture wars, right? It's like a vacuum. Multilateralism is moved, and kind of these other ideas come rushing in. Pope Leo says peace building has been relegated to a secondary role. Cooperation for development, disarmament, conflict prevention, and the establishment of mutual trust and is neglected in the name of power politics. So, I mean, a question I think that we've been wrestling with throughout this entire encyclical is, in this kind of environment, how do we tackle issues like artificial intelligence and climate change when we're so fractured and there's no mechanism or very few mechanisms in place for us to tackle these issues and challenges together? Certainly in the last few years, maybe decade or so, it seems that the United Nations now is less likely to be a place where a lot of those conversations and action takes place.
There's no democracy there because
It's
if
not-
one person says no, that's it. It's not going.
Well, it's always, the United Nations has always been fraught because it's tangled, to use a Newfoundland expression, for all these nations. But at least there was a space where things can be debated. Now it just seems we can just circumvent the United Nations and, I don't know, create, say, a board of peace to.
But it's also like, even with the United Nations and treaties and conventions and all of this, they don't matter, because if everyone doesn't sign it, it doesn't do anything.
Right.
Like you can commit war crimes because not everyone agreed that they're war crimes. The Geneva Convention has only been signed by X number of countries. So if you've created an AI treaty of we're not going to do this, it only applies to the people that sign it. So you have to, it's a balancing act of like, yeah, I signed it, but I know that the adversaries didn't. So it's like, have to play the game of being prepared, knowing that the people against you aren't playing by the same rules.
And even worse, you can sign it and do nothing.
Right, yeah.
Just totally ignore it,
Yeah.
right? So maybe in a way, we are entering into what some have called an apocalyptic era. Not apocalyptic in the sense of the end of anything, but just an era when the veil is being lifted to what has actually always been true, right? That these institutions and organizations that we constructed, that we thought were doing what we designed them to do, but they never really were, now has been revealed to be a myth, right? That in and of itself is very alarming and hard for us to come to terms with as a society, because again, so how do we tackle these things if there is no mechanism for multilateralism? He has a section called Supposed Political Realism. Again, his directness in this chapter. We live at a time of significant spiritual and cultural blindness. And also a time when we are disregarding history and the future in the name of pragmatism and at the expense of the most vulnerable, which again has always been true, but it seems to be on a more bolder scale now. He references this idea of realpolitik, which is really, this kind of idea that, the world is a scary place and it's very complicated. And so if you think we're just going to, achieve peace sometime, you're just way too naive. Some people are going to have to die. Hopefully the people on our side won't be the people who die, but that's just collateral damage for global stability, global order.
Yeah, we see how that's working.
But that's always been the argument. Always been the argument. And again, I think Pope Leo is making the argument that it's the most vulnerable who have always suffered with that kind of supposed political realism. He says, when people come to believe that nothing is genuinely true and that principles are hollow words, then the fuse in their hearts is lit for new eruptions of intolerance and aggression.
Yeah. They've created a culture that legit normalizes this idea that what you thought was true is not true anymore. They've created that narrative of
And when we thought we had made so much headway. But
And that's something he said earlier in that chapter. The war is not just the war with armaments that we normally call war, but we have cyber attacks now, and we've had them in our own province. There's a manipulation of information that AI, as Bill was just saying, can convince you that the narrative is not what you thought it was. So even though we're not theoretically in places of war here in Newfoundland or in Canada, in reality, there are warlike things. There is conflict happening, even among us in our world here, and that's the difference from the Second World War or the previous wars, that they were geographically confined in a sense.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, the rise of the use of drones in warfare.
Yes.
I mean, the war in Russia and Ukraine, the main weapon
Is a drone.
is to drone, and there's an arms race and who can get the best drone and the most cost-effective drone, so that they can mass produce them very quickly. We saw this in the beginning of the war between U.S. or war of the U.S. on Iran. Iran responded with many very cheaply built drones, and so that dehumanizes your enemy, because your goal there is to limit your casualties while increasing more damage and casualties on your enemy, right? Which maybe always was the point of war, but this technology makes that much more possible, and it takes war beyond the boundaries of where the war is actually being fought, like with a front line. There is no front line anymore. Everywhere.
Yes.
And again, Pope Leo calls in this chapter 4, transparency and responsibility. Transparency and responsibility. So then he switches into the second section of this chapter, which is building the civilization of love. He says that the construction of a world in a state of perpetual conflict is an evil and must be named for what it is. And really, in the beginning of this chapter, that's exactly what he's doing in detail, just saying this is how broken and fractured this world is right now. And and to continue the world in this state is an evil, and it must be named. And he says he's not doing this to be bleak or pessimistic or to bum us out, but he says it is necessary to be aware of where we are. Is what I was talking about last week. The path between naivete and ideology, right? To not be blind to what we're actually confronting. He in that section, he mentions a couple of scripture references. One that he didn't include that I think is relevant to this conversation is from Matthew 10:16. I'm sending you out like sheep, not sheep, into the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. There is a need to be clear-eyed, but yet hopeful. Clear-eyed, but hopeful. For this reason, even when suffering seems to have the last word, Christians serve the good and are sustained by a theological hope that gives reality both meaning and direction. That we can be balanced between honest about where we are, what we're facing, but filled with hope that we serve the good, and that we are sustained by hope, and that hope is not just, optimism, but it is action.
As we said in the prayer, it's not prediction. Hope is not prediction. It is participation.
Absolutely, yes, yes. He has very encouraging words. We can all do our part because it's very easy to become overwhelmed. I fluctuate back and forth between deep despair and riotous hope. Almost on a daily basis, back and forth, back and forth. He says, at this point, however, a subtle temptation may emerge, namely the thought that the problems are too big and we are too small, and that our choices, therefore, cannot make a difference. He says this is resignation disguised as realism, to which he gives 5 paths. First path is discerning words, and just the simplicity of being reminded to be mindful of our words. We are so flippant with words. Digital technology, social media has made it so easy to just put words out there.
And then you put a word out there and then the AI decides, another word comes up and you go, I never said that.
Not even AI.
Well, yeah, the tech.
Another person.
Yeah.
Right? Well, in your comment section, or it becomes a war of words. It becomes an arms race of words, rather than being mindful of our words and the weight that they carry. This is true of us as individuals, but I would appreciate it if our politicians took this to heart as well. Right? That your words have ramifications, they have power, they have influence. So be mindful of what you say. Pope Leo says we have a real opportunity to contribute to the common good each time we speak the truth, offer wise advice, support those in need of comfort, and denounce injustice and give a voice to the voiceless.
I think one of the big challenges there for us today, notion of what is the truth? Whose truth is it? And I think that's probably one of the largest challenges. Whose truth is it?
Yeah, and that was somewhere else in one of the chapters where he said something to the effect of that truth is like relational or a relationship or something.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas we think truth is something that's like an intellectual, philosophical idea. Construct. But that truth is a relationship. And of course, in Scripture in the New Testament, truth is a person. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
I think
what does that mean?
When truth becomes objectified instead of indwelling in a subject or subjects, we have problems.
And when it's not grounded in love, but rather
fear and power.
Yeah, fear and power.
That's why I think I agree with, I usually do agree with people like Elia Delio, who say that in this world of increasing AI technology, the theology can play a very important role, must play a very important role, and that theological institutions like Queen's College need to play an important role when it comes to words. And there was, I'll share it when I send around the recording of this week. Ryan Panzer, who is he blogs about theology and technology, and a few weeks ago he had a blog post where he said that he thinks theology might be one of the few AI-proof careers.
Wow. Yay!
Yeah, so I'll share that with you. But underlying the importance of theology, theological conversations, and here in spaces like this, but also beyond here.
As poor engineers lose their jobs to theologians.
It's already happening.
So I'm noticed.
Another path is building peace through justice. Not just any peace, but a peace born of justice. Reminded me of a quote from Cornel West. Justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. And maybe some of you have been on a protest line and you've shouted words like this: no peace, no justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. And one of the biggest challenges we're facing today is around socioeconomic injustice. And many politicians have arisen, especially those of the more populist variety, with promises of fixing this injustice or scapegoating others for the cause of this kind of injustice, and yet nothing really changes. So many politicians, academics, artists, theologians, and religious leaders are sounding the alarm about the growing economic inequality and the continuing political economic cynicism. So the longer that continues, the less and less likely that there is going to be peace, and the more likelihood that there will be an increase in violence. Because people will feel no other outlet to have their voices heard or their concerns addressed. So we will see an increasing rise in terrorism, assassinations.
Othering.
Has anybody read the novel, Kim Stanley Robinson's novel, Ministry for the Future?
No.
Oh, read it. It's set in the future, and this global committee, I suppose, has been brought together to fix climate change, and everything's on the table. And so they're working away at different things, but in the backdrop is exactly this kind of rise in terrorism and violence, because people feel like governments aren't doing anything, and their futures, well, their present, but also their future is being sacrificed.
Well,
So there's a rise in violence. Kim Stanley Robinson was a science fiction writer.
okay.
This is kind of science fiction, but he writes science fiction in the not too distant future, like not in the way in the future, but you read it and you think, this
Yeah, I
is
could see,
possible.
yeah.
This is very possible. And it will make you feel good. It's got a good end.
So can I start at the ending?
It's a bit of a thick book, so be ready. And of course, when we're talking about socioeconomic injustice, we have to realize that there's intersectionality involved, that it's not just socioeconomics, it's race, it's gender, it's sexuality, it's class. All of these things intersect with each other. So you can't just pull on one string, you have to address all of them together. And he encourages us with these words: let us never grow weary of seeking justice. He encourages us to adopt the perspectives of victims. He says there are times, not there are times when, in order to remain human, you must set aside your reservations and take a stand. And he says we're in a time right now where there is a need for history and memory. We need facts and we need witness. We need people to bear witness to the unjust suffering of others. And he says that the church can be a place of this living memory for victims, which reminded me of the work of Johann Baptist Metz. Has anybody read any of his work?
Yeah.
In the 60s and 70s, Roman Catholic scholar, and he talked about the dangerous memory of Jesus, and that how keeping the dangerous memory of Jesus alive has to keep you in solidarity with the unjust victims of violence and discrimination in the world today. So to keep the memory of Jesus alive is to be in solidarity to try to eradicate suffering.
And one of the great ironies, Robert, of our time is the forgetting that no longer having people who remember the Second World War. And it is absolutely fascinating what Israel is doing to Gaza and the West Bank. They have totally forgotten what happened in the Second World War. That is one of the most unbelievable ironies of our time.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to read I can't remember the author's name now. I just finished reading it. The history of the 100-Year War on Palestine. And from the very beginning, the goal was what we're witnessing now.
Wiping them out.
Yeah, they were very direct in the goal, which was to eradicate Palestinians.
From the river to
Yeah,
the
so you could create a Jewish state. So, they chose very early on, but you could apply a trauma-informed lens to this and see that all of this flows out of trauma.
You can also, in sort of the absence of this, when I hear that, I saw your quote post. I am concerned about I think what's happening in Gaza is terrible, and it's going to have to be held in accountability. But I'm worried about another meta-narrative about that trauma perspective, so I'll say it here.
Mhm.
And when I saw the quote there, coming out of World War II and the Holocaust, they may have forgotten, they may have used them. We lost 2/3 of European Jews, all too white Europeans.
Yep.
And nobody wanted them. So I would say removing the Palestinians from their land, it's horrible. And someone's held accountable. But that goes back on Europeans. And to say that was the strategy, I'd say, yeah, it was a strategy, but nobody wanted them. That's not a angelical restorationist eschatological thing. And I think there's a big concern right now. You got two things. And more than one thing can be true.
Mhm.
How to protect the Gazans, and also how to protect anti-Semitism. And even a presentation that a friend made the other day, which I loved. I noticed he only mentioned Hamas once, but it was the Israelite state funding Hamas for their benefit.
Yes, right.
And as much as that was interesting, I was more concerned the other way.
Mm.
Because I'm worried now that the vacuum is filling up. And if there's anybody that should not trust European, North American Caucasians, it's Jewish people.
Mm.
And so I don't know how we're going to do that. But that's a navigation there that there's tension there that somehow we have to protect the Gazans and the Palestinians, and maybe the Jewish people, because the numbers there have barely gotten over from World War II numbers. And I'm very concerned about that, because nobody's taken them. St. Louis went up the shores of North America. We didn't. United States did, Canada did. So how do you deal with the post-Holocaust and deal with the Holocaust used as rhetoric to remove Gaza?
Again,
I don't
want to get into the whole thing again.
The book that you noted, though, I read it. I felt it only dealt the Gaza. I don't think it did a very good job with the other side. Well, but that's my.
Well, I would say the other side has got a fair hearing over the years.
Yeah.
The Palestinians have not, because they had no one to speak for them.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying the book that was that. But it's fine. Thank you.
I think that whole notion of othering, as long as there's the other and the other is not somehow us too. I mean, the thing, as you've been saying all through this has always been the case. The fact now is the scale and the visibility of it, and the deadliness and the instantaneousness of it. That notion of other talks.
I think on a more general thing in terms of like history and memory, right now, it's all I can think about recently. A lot of our remembrance is performative. It's not because we're actually remembering and we're learning from what we did. It's because I need to be seen doing it so that other people know I did it.
Yeah.
That has just, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and there's, we just said July 1st, right? There's a lot of remembering to valorize and not remembering so that we don't do this again. Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and so it's not only just a looking back though, it's also, and that's why I really appreciate the 7 generations idea from Indigenous communities, that we're not only talking about memory, but we're also dealing with problems. Not only what has been, which we certainly do need to be there, but also what is to come in the future. And cultivating a healthy realism. We are in need of a healthy realism that avoids both political idealism and cynicism. I would add, and denialism and naivete, and a tendency to fall back into what we know is comfortable and familiar. And Pope Leo defines healthy realism as healthy realism seeks viable paths for making peace more than a mere word, through credible institutions, verifiable guarantees, patient negotiations, conflict prevention, and protection of civilians. There is a need to revive dialogue. He says, in order to build a civilization of love, we must engage in dialogue, for this is the primary means of coexistence between people and nations, and it is the alternative to open conflict.
Everybody comes like, okay, so the US and Iran, they get together, but they've already got, no, I need to have this and I need to have that. So where are you listening?
Yeah,
They're not-
very little listening.
Yeah.
He has this wonderful phrase, nothing is lost with peace, but everything is lost with war.
Mhm.
For
He
if we-
also reminds us peace is not just the absence of war.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Back to
So if
just.
we experience authentic encounters with others, with those who are different, strangers and migrants, it becomes much more difficult to even imagine war. And here I could go on and on and on about hospitality because it's one of my soapbox things to talk about. But I would also caution the church here. It can't just be the church doing hospitality as the host. We need to become the guest.
Exactly.
We need to listen. We need to sit at other people's table and to hear other people's stories and experiences and approaches.
Meet people where they are and listen to them.
Yes, but that means being invited into those spaces as well. We can't just insert ourselves into those spaces, which is what we normally do as the church. And he says there's a need for interreligious dialogue for peace, absolutely, and the need for diplomacy and multilateralism, absolutely. Conclusion. So these are just some questions I threw up there, but no, free for all. What resonated in not only this chapter, but the whole encyclical? What challenged? What questions remain for you? Maybe you're thinking, so what? We read this now, or what next? What can we do as communities, as individuals?
I'm a bit skeptical.
I would expect nothing less.
The church teaches a great story, right? But fails to, in the practical level, right? All of this language in this encyclical is great language, but it means nothing to most people. Who knows what subsidiarity is? Who knows anymore what the common good is? These are words from another century. They're not common language in modern people. That's the first thing I would say. I'm skeptical about what the church says and how it says it and how it lacks implementation. Remember, the Pope Wars in the last century were fought by Christians, which represents a total failure of that form of Christianity. The second thing I would say is the only way out of all this is through symbol. But we turn symbols into nouns. Symbols by definition are verbs. Like there's no such thing as the truth.
Truth and
That's a noun. And so it's kind of dead in the water right off the bat. There's no such thing as the peace. These need to be verbs. Like you say, it's truth telling. It's truth living. It's interrelational. It's down to earth, right? I'm old enough. I've heard most of this before, and I've been at the butt end of it where it has failed. So, like subsidiarity, as a parish priest, here's something I would like to do, right? So I go ahead and do it. The first thing the bishop comes down and says, you can't do it. And so like the bishop said here is sort of his vocation. So he might say, well, let's not ordain married men, or let's ordain women. Well, that would be the principle of subsidiarity in practice, but the top comes down and says, no, you can't do it. So, I mean, again, I listen to it, and like I say, I'm skeptical. I don't like to be skeptical, but, you know, I think that, like memory, we've lost what that means, right? Everything we do as Christians is based on memory, anamnesis, remember?
Yeah.
You know, it's not remembering something past or it's something that's living right now, right? But like, we've lost all that stuff, right? I don't know. I mean, I listen to the encyclical, it's great, and I think it's necessary to say this, but I think there has to be a way of reinterpreting this in some way that makes sense to ordinary people, right?
Yeah, and just one more thing I would add to what you're saying. The church itself is meant to be a verb, right? We've made the church into a noun, but it's better to speak of churching rather than church.
Whereas the old tradition is assemblying.
And again, I think the skepticism, like it's, you know, we have this document. It's again, the balance between enacting this in local communities, but also finding a bigger platform where this can become more of a reality and navigating between those two things. If we read it and we just walk away from it and it doesn't change us or our communities, but then I would say, so what? We have to take it and do it.
Excuse me, Hannah, before this session began, you said something about young people, and this, would you just say that again?
Oh, yeah. So this encyclical specifically, 'cause it's the only one I've ever read, has been like really popular on TikTok and Instagram of like young people getting together to have a drink and read the encyclical and debate it. So, which I've never seen before with a text that's primarily directed at the church, like, because it's not Christian influencers doing this. It's just everyday people who have never cared before that are like, this is something that matters to me. I don't care where it came from because it matters.
And I think that's part of I'll use the word significance because I can't think of another, or importance, and neither of them are it. The very fact that at least our attention is being directed towards a reality from a seemingly and hopefully a sincere neutral space, but a neutral space infused with the notion of love. The Christian notion of love. I think it can be the equivalent of not even the seed in the ground yet, but like the sower going to spread the seed. I think we're only at the spreading of the seed. It hasn't even hit the ground yet.
It's ironic, that's the gospel for this week, this Sunday come around.
I wanted to hear from Sister Elizabeth, but before she says anything, you've read 2 encyclicals. Because I made you read Laudato Si.
Sure.
He's obviously.
I'm not offended that you don't remember that.
Yes, I know that.
Yeah, and I think, Jerry, you're both right and wrong. I think you're right in that our church often says things but doesn't live into them. But I also think that our church finally is saying things more humbly. And Leo in this encyclical is in several places acknowledges the church's wrong and wrongness over centuries. But the other thing this encyclical does is reminds us this is a shared responsibility, not just for the church. Politicians, artists, academics, Queen's College. It over and over he reminds us that no one group in the society can make this change happen. And again, that's not what we're used to as a church to be even saying. And so I think we need to commend him for this. The other thing, like Laudato Si, one thing Laudato Si did, in addition to imprinting this new theology on us, which we hadn't even thought about as theology before, it caused a whole lot of other groups, religious groups and civil groups, to articulate their position on care for our common home or integral ecology, which are not the same, as we know. But both of those pieces came out of Laudato Si. So it became a catalyst for so many other groups to articulate where they are. And it's my hope, and I'm very happy to hear younger people reading it without knowing even what an encyclical is. That's become for them a catalyst. And I disagree with some of it. Absolutely. That's what dialogue is about. It's not about agreeing to everything, letting somebody else write your narrative. So I do think that there is value in our church daring to say things like this, not that we're any much better at it than anybody else, and that we're very good as a church at manipulating the narrative. But at the same time, the very fact the church says these things gives us a credible source to interact with, to engage with. And that's perhaps my best, hope for this encyclical, is that the very fact Robert Cook said, this is public theology, Elizabeth, can we do something about this? And I said, sure, let's set something up in September. And he said, no, it will be too late. Let's do it right away when the encyclical is brand new, so that we begin to cause something else to happen. And that proved the benefit, for me, that proves the benefit of this encyclical. So I think the fact that our church is flawed is a good reminder to us that every one of us is also flawed. And in our vulnerability, and he says this earlier, as you know, in the encyclical, in acknowledging our vulnerability, we're becoming part of this dialogue to remind us of the importance of all of us taking our responsibility in this. And that's really a major lesson of integral ecology. Integral ecology says that every little thing I do affects the whole. So that little thing is a good thing. If I smile at somebody I don't particularly like, if I take time to sit with one of our sisters who doesn't even remember what I said 2 minutes' time because she has cognitive impairment, if I spend many hours helping a student who can't quite get how to write a paper, those little things, they're very, very small things. But integral ecology says every one of those little small things helps create a better communion of all creation. And so I think our church is finally starting to take some of that shared responsibility in a way we've done sporadically, but we've never done quite so intentionally as we've seen with Pope Francis, I think, and now with Pope Leo. So for me, that's part of the wonder of even this encyclical happening. I know that ordinary people can't read most of this very high level stuff as the church documents tend to be. It's not quite as high level as they often are, though. There's some comfort in that. But I do think that even our conversation over these past 4 weeks has made each one of us individually a responsible agent now for making this become part of the circles that we are in, to encourage our talking about this and arguing about this and ruminating about this and imagining ways in our small worlds that we can make some of this become more real. And knowing, even if we only stay in our own small world, that making a difference in that small world makes a difference in the big world. Like, that's where the source of hope for me is, and why I use that in the prayer. Hope is not prediction. Hope is participation.
And the paradigm of the weaver, that whole prayer for weavers, that's what we have to be called, weavers, weaving these little threads that we're gathering here today in something bigger.
And we can only do that if we recognize the diversity, Bill, right among us. There's so many threads, whether they're age or personality or gender or race or ways of speaking. Like there's so many diversities, even in our small group, so many diversities without which you can't have a beautiful weaving. You just have one dull, boring color.
But I appreciate that he's not overly prescriptive. And especially in the conclusions, which I think he most directly addresses the church.
Yes.
And I think I like that he's really extending an invitation. Like he says, let us remain faithful to the truth. Let us invest in education, beginning with ourselves. Let us cultivate relationships. Let us love justice and peace. Those are all very participatory things.
And let us be weavers of hope.
Yeah. Michelle?
One of the terms that I really love, which originated, I believe, in the sort of environmentalist context, is globalization. The idea is that you have to act within your community, but think globally at the same time, because you can't, oftentimes the global problem is so big that you say, oh, I can't act globally, but every little thing that you do locally does have global effect.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we did this. I think it's significant, and I think we cannot necessarily know where this will go. But I think both individually, which is, we all go into our own worlds, but I think because those of us who have participated in it, I'm going to suggest that we may have a responsibility to one another and to, I'll say Queen's College as a convening body, to remind us to include the perspectives, to include the principles, to include that sense of openness to truth through encounter and participation experience, that we keep that maybe as a theme for a bit. And we as an institution need reminders to be true to that. So I think and I think it goes both ways. I think that yes, I can do my own individual bit. And I think we collectively, we don't know yet what we can do because tomorrow hasn't happened yet. And we don't know what the space will be. But I think this can be
we can't do it alone.
No, we can't do it alone. And some things we can, but there are things we can do together. And I think we need to be prepared for that. So I'm really glad.
It's interesting. He does name theologians and theological institutions as part of the group who have to take some responsibility for this, not for the encyclical, but to bringing into the world of AI ethical reasoning and ethical implications and ethical understandings. And remember, when we started to talk about AI at Queen's, it was only to stop them from cheating using AI for their assignments, right? But even then, we were saying to each other, we have more responsibility than just that. And so what do we do as a college? I think is a really important question. What do we do as a college to bring into those conversations the kinds of things that Leo is talking about here, the ethical pieces, so that we don't be performative, as you were saying earlier.
Anna and then Linda.
This chapter for me was quite interesting because as a theology student, I loved it and I was like, this is great. We should do all of these things. But as a member of the Army, I was like, this is very wishful thinking and very naive, and none of this can happen at a feasible level anytime soon. It just can't happen without every global power at every level being on board at the exact same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a question.
So what can we
Meld
take
both
from
of
our,
those pieces? Hannah, how do we meld both of those pieces?
Yeah.
The theological student in you that says that's not what our faith teaches us,
Yeah.
and the place where you're working, which says we have no hope as humans the only hope we have as humans is control each other, which is what armies believe. So how do we meld the two?
I don't know.
yeah, what can we take from our Christian story? Because our Christian story is rooted in that very dilemma. That very dilemma. So what can we take from the story to speak into the time in which we live? Linda? Then I guess our time's up.
Okay, so there a couple of things have been going through my mind. So I'll say the first one in response to what's just been said. A neighbor of mine is the vice president of a company that has expanded from making parachutes that were used for drones to actually now going into the programming for drones. And she flies all around the world to meet with government representatives who they establish contracts with. So we were talking the other day because she was home for a few days, and she said, what have you been doing? I said, well, I'm in this session with Queens. She says, oh yeah, so you signed up for a summer course. I go, no, actually, this one isn't a course. It's just, it's a gathering of anyone who was interested to look at the encyclical from Pope Leo. So she was asking me some questions about it. And as went on, she says, well, I've got to leave tomorrow because she was on her way to Europe. And she said, but when I come back, will you run off a copy of it for me? I'd like to read it. I said, okay. And she said, I'm just going to leave you with this. Whenever I go off to a meeting and one of the government people says, is it possible for a drone to do? And she says, I can't tell you what they're asking us about. Because it's national security. Said, okay. She says, but I say, well, I'm not sure. I'd have to take it back to the programmers to see. And then she starts asking them questions about what they think they're going to do with the new programming, if it's possible to make. And she said, some of their ideas scare me. And she says, I just keep on my phone a picture of my daughter, because her daughter is just turned 7. And she says, I just look at in those meetings when they ask me, what could it do? I keep looking at her and saying, do I want this for her future? And I said, then you've got to read this piece on AI. I'll have it for you for when you come back, and then we're going to talk some. I said, I'm glad you're looking at her picture. And she says, well, the other thing that runs through my mind, if it's not my company that developed it, another company will, and take the contract and not be looking at a picture of their daughter. And I said, that's the scary part. The second thing is my 19-year-old grandson is here visiting right now. He's off on a basketball court with his dad. But he was talking about AI. And he is feeling threatened by it. He says he can see the positive ways, but he said he knows too many people that he graduated with that are already using it malevolently. And so he's he's filled with some anxiety about it. So I told him about the class, and he's like, well, Nanny, can you run me off a copy? And after I read it, I said, yes, we can, Nathan. And I think this is real progress because he has some, he's on the spectrum. So dialogue on this level, I'm so happy he wants to dialogue about it. So anyway, that's, I guess, a way that in my own little world, I'm able to do some good, I think. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Linda, thank you for reminding us once again that truth is a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right? Whether it's a picture of someone, a loved one who keeps us grounded, or it's the relational sharing of experiences and anxieties that keeps us focused on whatever the truth might be. Mm-hmm. Good stuff. This was great. Thank you all for participating. And what comes next? Who knows? I think as an institution like Queen's College, I think we need to weave conversations about artificial intelligence into all aspects of what we teach here, because it has implications for every aspect of our lives. And we're all touched by this now. Mm-hmm. If you're in any kind of digital platform right now, you are being exposed to artificial intelligence technology, whether you're aware of it or not. Mm-hmm. So we have to be, again, I say, clear-eyed, informed, but hopeful as well. Yes, right. And to remain in relationship and in community with each other, to always be hope-filled together.
Yep.
So thank you all very much.
And Robert, thank you and Queen's College for sponsoring this event. It's been, I think, very timely, but I think also everybody who's been hearing these sessions, not just the group on the call, but people seeing the recording afterwards, so many others, all of us in our own way are becoming much more committed to achieving what you just said, and the things that we need to be focusing on, like inclusion, as Carmel was saying earlier, not othering, not saying because they're not like me, because they're different, they're less than me, or they're my enemy, or there's no place in my life for them. So all of that radical hospitality and inclusion that is so much necessary to offset this. So thank you for challenging us to be thinking about these things, to be reading the encyclical and taking it very seriously.
Thank you both for offering this, as well as the college.
Any excuse to get together with fellow theology nerds. Talk about theology.
Not quite theology on tap, but